Chapter 5: Empire, Exile, and the Transformation of the Pantheon. By the middle of the second millennium BCE, Mesopotamia entered a period defined less by isolated city-states and more by expansive empires. Political control shifted repeatedly, yet religious continuity persisted, adapting to new circumstances without dissolving its core structure. The Anunnaki, though no longer always at the center of surviving inscriptions, remained embedded within the evolving theology of the region. After the fall of the old Babylonian dynasty, the Kassites established control over Babylon around 1595 BCE. Their rule lasted for several centuries. Unlike many conquerors, the Kassites did not erase Babylonian religious identity. Instead, they adopted it. Marduk remained central in Babylon, and Enlil continued to be revered in Nippur. The ancient Sumerian and Akkadian traditions were preserved in scribal schools. The divine assembly concept endured, even as emphasis shifted among individual deities. During this era, religious texts were copied and recopied. The act of preservation itself shaped theology. Myths were standardized, hymns were compiled. Lists of gods were organized into ordered sequences, reflecting an increasingly systematic worldview. These god lists are particularly significant. They demonstrate how Mesopotamian scholars categorized the divine world. Deities were grouped according to function, status, and lineage. The Anunnaki appear in some of these compilations as a recognized collective of major gods. As Assyria rose to prominence in northern Mesopotamia during the Late Bronze and Early Iron Ages, a new imperial perspective emerged. The Assyrian kings, ruling from cities such as Ashur and later Nineveh, framed their authority in terms of divine mandate. Ashur, the national god of Assyria, became the symbolic embodiment of imperial expansion. Yet Assyrian religion did not reject earlier traditions. Instead, it integrated them. Enlil, Ishtar, Shamash, and other established deities retained importance. Within this integrated system, the Anunnaki were still acknowledged as part of the divine hierarchy. Their collective identity persisted, even if individual gods received greater attention in royal inscriptions. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, reaching its height in the 7th century BCE under rulers such as Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal, left behind extensive textual archives. Excavations at Nineveh uncovered libraries containing thousands of cuneiform tablets. Among these were copies of earlier myths, including the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Enuma Elish. These texts, though composed centuries earlier, were preserved and studied by Assyrian scribes. The continued transmission of these myths ensured that the concept of divine assembly remained active in intellectual life. The Anunnaki appear in these narratives not as forgotten relics, but as enduring participants in cosmic order. During the same period, geopolitical pressures intensified. The Near East was increasingly interconnected. Trade routes linked Mesopotamia with Anatolia, the Levant, and Egypt. Military campaigns reshaped borders. Exile became a political tool. Conquered populations were relocated across imperial territories. Cultural exchange accelerated. One of the most significant events of this era occurred in 586 BCE, when the Neo-Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II conquered Jerusalem and deported segments of the Judean population to Babylon. This event, known as the Babylonian exile, would profoundly shape later religious history. While the Hebrew scriptures do not explicitly reference the Anunnaki as understood in Mesopotamian tradition, the exilic encounter exposed Judean scholars to Babylonian cosmology. Themes such as creation, flood, and divine counsel show conceptual parallels. It is important to approach these parallels carefully. Cultural exchange does not imply direct equivalence, yet the broader Near Eastern environment shared certain structural ideas: divine assemblies, cosmic judgment, and ordered creation. Within Babylon itself, the New Year festival, known as Akitu, celebrated Marduk's supremacy. During this ritual, the Enuma Elish was recited. The text describes the Anunnaki acknowledging Marduk's kingship after his victory over primordial chaos. In this narrative, the Anunnaki are not rivals to Marduk, but affirmers of his authority. They build his temple, Esagila, and proclaim 50 names praising his power. Their role reflects continuity of the assembly concept within a reorganized hierarchy. As the Neo-Babylonian Empire gave way to Persian conquest under Cyrus the Great in 539 BCE, another transition unfolded. The Achaemenid Persians ruled vast territories stretching from Anatolia to the Indus Valley. Persian governance allowed considerable local autonomy. Temples in Babylon continued to function. Traditional rituals persisted. Yet the broader imperial context introduced new theological influences, including Zoroastrian concepts of cosmic dualism. Despite these influences, Mesopotamian religious traditions did not immediately vanish. Cuneiform tablets continued to be produced for several centuries. Astronomical records, temple accounts, and ritual texts show remarkable continuity. The Anunnaki appear less prominently in later inscriptions, yet the structural concept of divine hierarchy remains visible. Over time, however, the religious landscape gradually transformed. Greek conquest under Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE introduced Hellenistic culture. Greek language and philosophy spread throughout the Near East. Local traditions blended with Hellenistic interpretations. By the early centuries of the Common Era, cuneiform writing had largely disappeared. Temples once dedicated to Enlil, Inanna, and Marduk fell into disuse. The old pantheon faded from active worship. Yet the memory of these gods did not vanish entirely. Their names survived in texts buried beneath ruins, waiting for rediscovery. The transformation of the pantheon across empires illustrates a central pattern in Mesopotamian religion: adaptation within continuity. The Anunnaki did not represent a static doctrine. They were part of a living system responsive to political change. As empires expanded, divine authority expanded with them. As cities declined, theological emphasis shifted. But the foundational idea of a structured cosmic order persisted across centuries. From Sumerian city-states to Assyrian conquest and Babylonian exile, the Anunnaki remained woven into narratives of power, judgment, and creation. The rivers continued their course. Empires rose and fell along their banks. And beneath the shifting banners of kings, the memory of the divine assembly endured, recorded in clay and preserved in silence beneath the soil of Mesopotamia. Chapter 6: Rediscovery, Archaeology, and the Return of Forgotten Gods. For more than 2,000 years, the names of the Anunnaki lay silent beneath layers of earth. The temples of Uruk and Nippur had long since crumbled. The cuneiform tablets that once recorded hymns and myths were buried in collapsed archives. Classical Greek and Roman authors knew of Babylon as a distant and ancient city, but they did not preserve detailed knowledge of Sumerian theology. The older language of Sumer had vanished entirely from living memory. By the early modern period, Mesopotamia was a land of ruins. Travelers described massive mounds rising from the plains of Iraq, not fully understanding what lay beneath them. The biblical city of Nineveh was believed by some to be legendary rather than historical. The rediscovery of the Anunnaki did not begin with myth. It began with excavation. In the 19th century, European scholars and explorers turned their attention toward the Near East. Motivated by a mixture of scholarly curiosity, imperial ambition, and biblical interest, they sought material evidence of ancient civilizations mentioned in scripture and classical texts. In the 1840s, Austin Henry Layard began excavations at sites near modern Mosul in northern Iraq. Beneath the mounds, he uncovered the remains of the Assyrian capital of Nineveh. Among the most significant discoveries was the library of King Ashurbanipal, a vast collection of clay tablets. These tablets were covered in unfamiliar, wedge-shaped markings. At first, their meaning was unknown. Yet scholars such as Henry Rawlinson had already begun the process of deciphering cuneiform script, using the multilingual Behistun inscription in Persia as a key. Gradually, the language of ancient Mesopotamia began to speak again. As tablets were translated, scholars encountered myths previously unknown in Europe. The Epic of Gilgamesh emerged from the fragments. The Enuma Elish was reconstructed. The Atrahasis epic revealed a flood narrative older than the biblical account. Within these texts appeared the names of ancient gods, Anu, Enlil, Enki, and among them, references to the Anunnaki. For 19th century audiences, these discoveries were startling. They demonstrated that complex civilizations had flourished in Mesopotamia long before classical Greece. They also revealed striking parallels between Mesopotamian and biblical traditions. Scholars approached the material cautiously. Philology, the careful study of language, became central to interpretation. Texts were dated based on paleographic analysis. Variants were compared across copies. The term Anunnaki was translated from Akkadian sources, while earlier Sumerian references to the Anunna were identified in older tablets. It became clear that these were not mysterious outsiders, but part of a well-documented pantheon. Archaeology expanded beyond Nineveh. Excavations at led by Sir Leonard Woolley in the 1920s, uncovered royal tombs containing elaborate artifacts. At Nippur, extensive temple complexes were revealed. At Eridu and Uruk, deeper layers pushed the timeline of urban civilization further back. Each excavation added context. The Anunnaki were not isolated names within myth. They belonged to a broader cultural and material world. Cuneiform tablets discovered in different cities revealed variations in theology. In some contexts, the Anunnaki were associated with heaven, in others, with the underworld. Their role shifted depending on period and region. Scholarly consensus gradually formed around several points. The Anunnaki were a group of high-ranking deities. Their name likely meant offspring of An. They functioned within a structured divine assembly. They were not depicted as extraterrestrial visitors, but as anthropomorphic gods embedded in Mesopotamian cosmology. Yet as academic understanding deepened, popular fascination grew. The 20th century witnessed increasing public interest in ancient mysteries. Archaeological discoveries were reported in newspapers. Translations of myths reached wider audiences. The idea that civilizations thousands of years old had left behind detailed records captured the imagination. At the same time, modern society was undergoing rapid technological change. The rise of aviation, space exploration, and nuclear science reshaped perceptions of possibility.
Ancient myths were sometimes reinterpreted through contemporary lenses.
Within academic circles, however, caution prevailed. Assyriologists emphasized textual evidence. Interpretations were grounded in philology, comparative linguistics, and archaeological context. By the mid-20th century, universities had established departments dedicated to Near Eastern studies. Thousands of tablets were catalogued. Museums displayed reliefs depicting Assyrian kings and mythological scenes. The Anunnaki became known primarily within scholarly communities and among readers interested in ancient mythology. They were understood as part of a rich and complex religious tradition that developed over millennia. It is important to recognize the methodological discipline that shaped this rediscovery. Deciphering cuneiform required decades of collaborative effort. Establishing reliable translations demanded attention to grammar and syntax. Reconstructing fragmented tablets involved comparing copies from different archives. The rediscovery of the Anunnaki was not sudden revelation. It was cumulative scholarship. Meanwhile, the physical sites of Mesopotamia faced modern challenges. Political instability and conflict endangered archaeological heritage. Museums were looted. Sites were damaged. Despite these difficulties, international efforts continued to document and preserve what remained. Digital imaging technologies allowed tablets to be scanned and shared globally. Scholars in different countries collaborated on new editions of ancient texts. Through this sustained effort, the world of ancient Mesopotamia became increasingly accessible. The Anunnaki, once buried beneath centuries of dust, returned to human awareness through patient academic labor. They re-entered discourse not as living deities, but as historical subjects. Their rediscovery also raised broader questions about cultural memory. How do civilizations vanish? How are their ideas preserved? What responsibilities accompany excavation? The mounds of Mesopotamia had concealed not only architecture, but worldview. When those mounds were opened, they revealed a civilization deeply concerned with order, fate, and divine hierarchy. The Anunnaki, as members of that hierarchy, remind us that mythology is inseparable from environment and social structure. Their existence in text reflects human attempts to understand vulnerability and authority. In the chapters that follow, we will examine how modern interpretations have diverged from academic consensus. The rediscovery of ancient texts created new possibilities for imagination. But before considering those reinterpretations, it is essential to remain grounded in what archaeology has established. The Anunnaki emerged from clay tablets written in Sumerian and Akkadian. They were preserved in temple archives and royal libraries. They were rediscovered through excavation and decipherment. Their return to modern awareness is a story not of sudden revelation, but of careful scholarship unfolding across generations. Write your questions in the comments. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for upcoming episodes of the documentary series. New documentaries are released every Wednesday and Friday on this channel.